Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our last luncheon for 2020. But we do have one more before the end of BOMA Greater Dallas's year. So thank you to those that are joining us in person at Eddie Dean's, and thank you for those watching virtually. Today's sponsor is LandCare, a huge supporter of BOMA Greater Dallas. Macy Wallenberg will be joining us today, and you'll get to hear from her in just a few minutes. So thank you to Macy and LandCare for supporting this event and for joining us today. I'd also like to recognize our official sponsors, the group that helps make events like this happen. Cornerstone partners are April Building Services and AMST Elevator Interiors, Interstate Restoration, LandCare, and Mooring Construction and Restoration. Keystone partners are America's Corporate Building Maintenance, Blackman Mooring and BMS CAT, Britain Building Maintenance, CertaPro Painters of Far North Texas, Citywide Building Services, Flynn Companies, Property Paving Incorporated, Reef Parking, Texas Roof Management, and United Mechanical. Our foundation partners are 5, ABM, Empire Roofing, Facility Solutions Group, Night Restoration Services, Select Commercial Services, Sun Commercial Roofs, and United Protective Services. Thank you to our allied companies for participating in our official sponsorship program. We truly value our partnership and the support that you provide to BOMA Greater Dallas. Before I jump into the upcoming events, I want to remind you all that the 2020 BOMA Greater Dallas and BOMA Fort Worth salary survey is ending soon. I encourage every real estate manager and member to take a few minutes to complete the survey. As an added bonus to participants, each member who completes the survey will receive a free copy of the results. You'll also be invited to a participant-only webinar where Redex, our researcher, will explain the final results. Don't miss out on this opportunity to gain insight on salaries in our market. Whether you're at the administrative level or a senior manager and you're wondering what your next step is in your career, you should join us at the Women's Breakfast. It'll be on December 2nd, and you'll have an opportunity to hear from a seasoned panel on how to break through to the next level. Our panelists will be Mary Learston, Carrie McCampbell, and Ryan Rothaker, and we'll have Jacqueline Bird as our moderator. For this event, the Education Committee is partnering with the Community Service Committee to collect donation items for the Genesis Women's Shelter. If you're unable to attend the event but you'd like to still donate, you can shop their Amazon wish list and make sure that the items get shipped to our office. To allow for social distancing, we are capping this event to 50 in-person attendees, so make sure that you register now. Each year, the Community Service Committee, with the assistance of BOMA Greater Dallas members and their tenants, supply the children of numerous charities within our community with Christmas gifts that they may not otherwise receive. Due to safety precautions, this year's toy drive looks a little bit different than years past. Rather than making a trip to the store, toys may be purchased directly from our toy registry at walmart.com. Your gifts will be delivered to a designated collection site, and BOMA Greater Dallas volunteers will make certain participating charities receive toys in time for the holiday season. To participate, all you have to do is just click on the registry link on the BOMA Greater Dallas website, and you can start your order. It's that simple. The 2020 Southwest Region Conference has been postponed to April 2022. We're excited to host the conference here in Dallas, and can't wait for that in 2022. The awards and gala committees are joining forces in January to put on a joint event encompassing both the awards ceremony and the foundation gala. This event is set to take place on January 30th, 2021, and it's sure to be a fun and eventful night. Sponsorship for this event is still on sale now, so just reach out to Colleen Bransford or visit the BOMA Greater Dallas website for more information. There will be a gala happy hour coming up on December 10th to help collect wine and spirit bottles and gift cards for the gala and awards ceremony. Join us for a happy hour equipped with appetizers, beverages, and just networking with our BOMA friends. Thank you in advance for your efforts to help make this event spectacular. It's our goal to build upon the success of this event and continue to support and fund programs at a high level. Now I'd like to introduce today's luncheon sponsor, Macy Wallenberg of LandCare. Macy was actually just promoted to branch manager for LandCare just this past week. Very well deserved. Congratulations, Macy. She's now going to tell us a little bit about LandCare and introduce our featured speaker for today's luncheon. Hello, Macy. Welcome.
Good morning, Boma, Greater Dallas. If you don't know me, my name is Macy Wallenberg, and I am a proud employee of LandCare here in DFW. LandCare is an employee-owned company across 23 different states with over 50 branches. We provide commercial landscape management to our customers, as well as design, installation, and irrigation services. We pride ourselves in our core values and bringing those to all of our interactions at Boma, like our trade show committee, have fun with a commitment to teamwork, or in our day-to-day jobs of inspiring others with meaningful environments. Whatever the task may be, LandCare is ready to tackle it. We have been thankful for the partnerships between allies that has allowed us to provide even better experiences to our customers who need help on their properties through services outside of landscaping. Although 2020 has thrown us for a loop, we are finishing up our third year as Cornerstone Partners with Boma Greater Dallas and can't wait to see what is in store for next year. Now I'd like to introduce the featured speaker of today's luncheon, real estate economist, Dr. Mark Dessoir. Dr. Mark G. Dessoir is a real estate economist who served for 18 years as chief economist for the Real Estate Center at Texas A&M University in College Station. He has given more than 1,600 presentations to more than 295,000 people and has written over 90 articles for magazines and journals. His research findings have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Money Magazine, and Business Week. His clients include banks, private equity firms, real estate investment trusts, construction firms, engineering companies, wealth managers, private foundations, and commercial and residential brokerage firms. He has also made presentations to local and national trade associations all over America. He makes complex economic issues easily understandable. Mark's goal is to provide his audience with a toolkit of useful information that will help them make good business decisions to their families, their clients, and their company. In 2015, he stepped down from his position at the Real Estate Center to focus all of his time and effort on analyzing current economic conditions and communicating his analysis to others. He combines academic training in economics, real estate, finance, and history to make sense of current economic trends. Mark is joining us today to give insight into the current state of the real estate economy. Please welcome Mark, and I will hand it over to you.
It's great to be here with you this morning. I wish I could be there in person with you, but you know what? I can see your faces out there. I know many of you. I'm going to do over 55 of these by the end of the year here, so I'm getting real comfortable with it. And thank you for being a part of this event. The title of my presentation is Playing It Out of the Deep Rough. Many of you know that I like to have a picture at the very front of my presentation. I've done that for, since 1997. That's 23 years now. And I was watching the US Open a couple of months ago, and you know how the USGA is at the US Open. They like to make the rough get really deep and then make the fairways really narrow. And it creates a kind of situation. I thought, you know what? All of us, whether we're real estate investors or business owners and decision makers, we're all kind of playing it out of the deep rough right now. And I want to kind of share that metaphor with you. Next slide, please, Christine. By the way, it's been really pleasant to work with Christine. I'm looking forward to doing this. Okay, so what does it mean playing it out of the deep rough? I watched Bryson DeChambeau. He said, you know what? I'm going to hit the ball as hard as I can, and I don't really care if I get in the rough or not. That's not going to ruin my game if I get in the rough. And man, he did that over and over and over. And I was watching, as I was watching, I thought, okay, I see the new metaphor for my presentations, because you can see in that picture to the right there how tall a 6 to 12 inch rough looks like. And what I saw him do, he didn't hit them all in the fairway. And it's hard to keep it all in the fairway now, trust me. And what he would do is go up, and if he was in the rough, he'd pragmatically assess the situation, pick the best option available, which was what club am I going to hit, and then execute it to the best of his ability. And a lot of times the result was good. And some of the times the result was really bad. But what I saw was he never got mad. He never quit. He never sat and complained. He just methodically went to the next shot, recognizing he's playing it out of the deep rough and do the best he can. And he did that for 4 days in a row, and he won the golf tournament. And that was what I decided, this is how I want to try to react to the situation we're in right now. You're not going to have a good lie every day. You're going to have to hit something out of the rough. And sometimes it's unpredictable what will happen, but you do the best you can and get moving on to the next shot. So with that, let's go to the next slide, please. It didn't take very long before this picture popped into my head. And so let's say the virus, we kind of became acquainted with it somewhere in March. It wasn't a month later till this tug of war picture started popping into my head. And this is why I'm really bullish about the future of the United States. We're in a tug of war, and we've been in it now since April in my mind. And it's the fear of getting sick versus the fear of losing your freedom. And the good news is the American people don't want to lose their freedom, and they'll fight for it, and they'll resist anybody taking that away. And that's great, because this is how our economy rebounds. I remember after 9/11, the similarity to 9/11 is just really clear to me there. 9/11, we had the terrorist attacks, and for 2 or 3 weeks, nobody wanted to leave their house. You didn't know how much more terrorism there's going to be. Nobody wanted to fly for a month or two. But it didn't take, I was going to say 3 to 4 weeks. The American people came out and said, I'm going to start flying again, because I don't care if there is terrorism out there. I'm not going to hide in my house forever. To heck with that. That's not what Americans do. And that's happening again this way. It's kind of showing up in weird ways. Like, okay, so some people want to make a political statement by not wearing a mask. I understand the tug of war here with that, but I don't understand not wearing a mask. The problem is that I wear a mask because I think it's courteous to other people. But it's dawning on me that not wearing a mask to go into somebody's business is threatening the future of their business. Because I can promise you, if I go into a store and there's 4 or 5 people in there not wearing a mask, or even a couple, I'm not going to go in, and I'll go back home, and I'll come back another time, maybe, or I'll just shop online and forget it. So when you meet people that are talking about making a big deal about wearing a mask, and that all I ever hear is it's some kind of political thing, just suggest to them that, you are a threat to the future of our economic recovery by not doing that. So just keep that in mind. When you go into somebody's business without a mask on, you're hurting their chances of survival. Next slide, please. This is something I never anticipated. I'm 66 years old, and I keep getting surprised all the time. I guess that's the fun thing about being alive. There's always something new. I never guessed that the rule of law could be challenged like we have in this country. The value of a contract has never been lower. And by that, I mean, what contracts am I talking about? I'm talking about a mortgage contract, or how about a lease contract? Okay, I'm going to get into this. Next slide, please. I never thought that a governor could shut down businesses. I didn't even know that was possible. And so you get a mayor or a governor that says he can decide, or she can decide, what's essential and what isn't. You know what most people's definition of an essential business is? If my livelihood depends on my business being open, it's essential to me. If my children are going to college based on the income I'm generating from my business, that's essential to them too. And the extended family that might be working with me. I don't hear anybody talking about the tragedy of a governor closing businesses and ruining families' futures because they determine something's non-essential. I mean, it's okay to go to the pot dispensary and buy pot, but other businesses have been deemed unnecessary. And what that tells me is pretty much that means the people that own those businesses are unnecessary too. These are like a taking. These are like public takings without compensation in my mind. Next slide, please. California has taken this to another step. Not only have they decided that a rental contract doesn't matter anymore, and it's like, okay, and so all of this unpaid rent, we're going to convert it to consumer debt, and then you got to go to small claims court to go after it. Well, you know, maybe for a big REIT that owns 12,000 units, maybe they got the capacity to do that. But what about two school teachers that decide to buy a couple of rental properties for their future because they know Social Security doesn't pay enough, and so they're making plans for their future, and they bought a couple of rental properties, and all of a sudden some mayor or some other government official says, sorry, but you can't collect rent and you can't get rid of people that aren't paying. It's unfathomable to me. Next slide, please. Then you got these people, the Center for Disease Control. You know, I've been not just skeptical, but absolutely antagonistic against national media. I've told my clients for over a decade, way before Trump ever got into office, that watching cable news of any news, period, is just nothing but gossip and propaganda. And as a business person or somebody that people rely on you for good business advice, you shouldn't spend a minute watching TV news of any kind, because it's nothing but distortions and propaganda designed to make you nervous, make you feel fearful, anxious, so that you'll tune in the next night and they can sell more advertising dollars. But I don't trust the CDC anymore. In fact, I don't really trust too many health officials anymore, because they've been kind of, I like the word, I don't like lying. I like the word obfuscation. That's what the Federal Reserve does when they tell you everything's okay when it's not, and they know it. They don't call that lying. But if you saw a presentation of mine in 2009 or 10, whenever it was, when Ben Bernanke came out and said the credit markets are okay, all of the turmoil is isolated in the subprime residential lending market. And I'm talking to people like you all the time, and they're telling me the CMBS market was totally shut down too. I was out making a speech about a week after Bernanke made those comments, saying, you know what, I'm not saying that the Federal Reserve is lying to the American people, but what they're telling you is not even close to the truth. And when Ben Bernanke wrote his book later, I saw the word in there, obfuscation. So it's not lying, it's just not telling the truth. And so what, I didn't expect this out of health people or scientists or doctors. I didn't expect this, but we're getting the same thing from this group too. So the problem with obfuscation is you just realize that whatever a person says may or may not be true, and then you lose your credibility, and that's too bad. But anyhow, so who figured out that the Center for Disease Control could halt rental evictions? Where did that come from? Next slide, please. There's some good news on this front, because I am not a fan of litigation. I have never promoted the idea of litigation. I have a lot of friends that are lawyers, but I've never promoted anybody suing anybody, but I am now. And there's good news, because a federal judge is allowing 21 businesses in Seattle to sue the city government over their massive failures to provide protection to business owners who pay taxes in that community. And I hope this happens all over the country. If you have a business where you have to board it up every time something good happens or something bad happens, you win the Super Bowl, your business gets torn up. You have an election result you don't like, the business gets torn up. That's not America. And I hope people all over this country sue mayors and governors for damages, because when you take people's private property rights and their assets, then you should compensate them, period, in my opinion. Keep in mind, I'm an economist, 50% chance everything I say is wrong. Next slide, please. There's more good news here too. The World Health Organization, I don't believe them either, unfortunately. I mean, it's not that I don't believe them, I'm just skeptical. It's like, okay, if you say something, maybe there's 50% chance you're right or wrong too. I'm the one, I'm willing to admit it. A lot of other politicians won't admit they made a mistake ever. And that's why I really don't like politicians very much. But the World Health Organization just came out, this is good. This was back just a month ago, and said lockdowns were terrible. It was a huge mistake. The WHO is warning against lockdowns. Okay, so I can't fathom that we will have another lockdown. I know we're talking about it. I just can't fathom we'll do it, because having that lockdown was a gigantic financial and economic disaster. And I know it's scary to see people dying, and I know it's scary to see hospitals full, and I know it's scary to see tents up where you go to get a test. But you know what's scarier than that is to have 20 or 50 million people lose their jobs and lose their businesses permanently. Nobody's talking about the costs and benefits. It's just nothing but we got to watch the hospitals so they don't get overloaded. Well, you know, there's a lot of other businesses in this country that people depend on for their livelihoods too, that are just as important as a hospital getting overloaded in my mind. And I tell you what, most businessmen and women in this country that own businesses feel exactly like that too. It's part of that tug of war. It's like, you taking away my freedom, I'm not going to be very happy with you. And they shouldn't be happy with you. And let's pray our government's not stupid enough to do another lockdown, even if it gets really bad. You can do other things. And American people should be smart enough to not go out when you got the virus. But that's what freedom's all about. You have the freedom to go out and get COVID if you want to. Just don't expect to have a hospital empty waiting for you. Next slide, please. So people were asking me about the election, and you know me, I've told you for years, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, and I find both parties to be a blight on our economic future with their tribalism. But enough people asked me about what would happen if Joe Biden got elected president. I thought, okay, I'm not going to dodge it this year. So what did I do? I watched all 4 nights of the Democratic convention. I watched all 4 nights of the Republican. I watched the presidential debate, number 1. I watched the VP debate, and I read the 110-page Biden-Sanders unity platform. And I took notes just like I was in a college freshman psychology class to learn what was going on. And so I'm going to provide you here the next few slides with a summary of what a Biden presidency will try to do. Presidents like to talk about doing stuff, but what they can actually do is often very much different. But here's what the game plan is. So next slide, please. The first thing that I noticed was that, and these are all quotes. I mean, I might have edited them slightly to make them more readable, but these are direct quotes. And the first 2 words in the document are climate change. So if that makes you feel good, you're going to be really happy, because you're going to hear nothing but climate change for the next 4 years. And then 2 paragraphs down, just to see how deep this is, we must embed environmental justice and climate justice at the heart of our policy and agenda. So I interpret this to mean that everything they do is going to be based on the first question is, how does this affect global warming? Oh, I forgot, we changed it to climate change because that global warming brand wasn't selling very well. So anyhow, I'm a little skeptical about it. I'd like to see a cost benefit analysis of this. So, but we won't see that. All we will see is the proposed benefit of doing climate change stuff, but we'll never see the cost of it, because that's not the way politicians work. That's why we're not seeing the cost of lockdowns. Next slide, please. I like talking about both. I'm not a proponent of a Republican policy or a Democrat policy at all. I'm a proponent for freedom, period. So what are they going to do with energy? I had people ask me, you know, is this the end of the energy business? And it kind of could be. It's going to be slow over time. But here's what the plan is. Eliminate carbon pollution from power plants. So that'll be the end of the coal industry. So, you know, that's good for a lot of people. But if you live in a state that's dependent on coal, it's like, it's not so much fun when a government purposely runs you out of business that you've been in for 3 generations. And so you can understand why people aren't just real keen about that. I haven't heard anybody say, I'm going to vote for a politician because they're going to destroy my town and destroy my state and destroy my future for earnings. It's just the way it goes. And again, there's pros and cons to everything. We're going to install 500 million solar panels and 60,000 wind turbines, and we're going to transition 500,000 school buses to 0 emissions. That means electric. Transition 3 million federal, state, and local vehicles to 0 emissions. and install at least 500,000 public charging stations from coast to coast and repeal fossil fuel subsidies. So the answer is, if you live in Midland, which I know nobody does that's in this meeting, but if you live in Midland, Texas, or Jal, New Mexico, or up in North Dakota or parts of Pennsylvania, the answer is yes. Your government is going to try to stop anybody from mining or producing oil and gas. That's what the game plan is. Like it or not, that's the game plan. Next slide, please. On the labor front, this could be some really significant changes. This is clean energy jobs should provide an opportunity to join a union. Subject material procurements to Buy America, Buy Clean, and Hire Local. I love this. I love the fact that we should buy American. That means it'll be a little more expensive, but so what? If things are a little more expensive and millions of people get a job and can rejoin the middle class, which I think, for me, means you have a chance of buying a house, you have a chance of putting your children through college, and you have a chance to buy healthcare, all of that. So I'm a big fan of all of that. More products should be stamped made in America. You know, what I would prefer to say is more products should be made in America, not stamped that way, because a stamper job isn't a big deal, but making something is a big deal. Raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. This sounds good, but you know what businesses do when labor costs go up? It's a traditional economic trade-off of labor and capital. So what happens is, as the cost of labor increases, the tendency is to automate more of your jobs. And I just saw a week or two ago that Chipotle is going to open up their first all-digital restaurant. So this is going to be a little bit of a trend for the future. There's going to be less and less jobs for high school students anywhere. Restore workers for secondary boycotts. I don't like this, and I'll just tell you right up front, this is not a good thing. Secondary boycott means that if the Service Employees Union decides to go on strike, then the steel workers and the Teamsters and the longshoremen and the postal workers, they can all go on strike in sympathy. And this is what happened in the 70s when we had runaway inflation. That's why I've been advising my clients now for the last 23 years that interest rates are going to stay low, cap rates are going to stay low, because there is no runaway inflation. If we get new laws to make a secondary boycott possible, I'll be changing my tune and saying, you know what? It is possible that we could have significantly higher inflation going forward. And they want to repeal so-called right-to-work laws. That's their phrase, so-called right-to-work laws. We have that in Texas. That's one of our secrets to success. That's why people want to move their businesses here, and people want to move here because the jobs are here. And I could see where states like Illinois and New Jersey and New York that can't attract workers. Nobody wants to go there. I can see why they'd want to take that away from us, because that's part of our advantage over them, and it'll even the playing field and make life more difficult for everybody. And incentivize in policies to incentivize offshoring. I like that one. I'm sick of having our jobs first offshored to Japan back in the 80s, and then Mexico in the 90s, and then India in the late 90s, and then China for the last 20 years. When people say there is no middle class anymore, that is true, because so many of these jobs have whatever they're in, manufacturing, information technology, you name it. A lot of those jobs were in America that were putting people's children through college, and they're gone now. And that's the only reason the word socialism has even been introduced in this country, because we have purposefully exported a bunch of millions of jobs to India and China and Mexico and Japan. And then this one at the bottom is really interesting to me. Any employer funded by taxpayer dollars must allow workers to join a union. So for example, it's going to be interesting to see, because Walmart's going to be a big part of the distribution of a lot of things. Let's say they get involved in healthcare, or CVS for that matter. So you go there to get your vaccine whenever that comes out. Well, if CVS works for the government and does anything funded by taxpayer dollars, then they're going to be asked to unionize their workforce. And there's a whole lot of companies that'll say, no thanks, I'm not participating in this. Just like Pfizer, the one that announced that vaccine a couple of days ago, they made a big point to say, we weren't a part of Operation Warp Speed. We paid for our stuff ourselves. So there's going to be there are a lot of businesses that will not work with the federal government to unionize their workforce because they don't want to. It'd probably ruin their business. Next slide, please. It wouldn't ruin their business. It would ruin the profitability of the firm, which in the basic is it ruins the business. Housing, I won't cover too much, but just a couple here, the top ones. Housing's a right, not a privilege. There's no explanation of these things. They're just one-liners in there. And enact a new homeowner and renters bill of rights. I have no idea what this is, but to me, what I'm hoping it isn't is that, yes, we have a right to live in someone else's house that paid for it, and we have a right to live there rent-free for as long as we want to. I hope that's not the case because that will change the nature of real estate investing a lot. Next slide, please. And I've given permission to BOMA to distribute this to everybody, and be happy. I hope you'll kind of use it as a reference thing. I'm not going to read you every line in this presentation, but for commercial real estate, this was all I found. And keep in mind, I'm sitting there with a pad and paper reading every page, categorizing these things. What I did see for commercial real estate was national goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions for all new buildings by 2030, and incentivize tens of billions of dollars in private sector investment to retrofit. So if you're thinking about retrofitting thinking this would be a good business opportunity, the answer is yes, it would. But keep in mind, if you get incentivized by the federal government, they're going to ask you to unionize your workforce. So there'll be a trade-off you'll have to consider. And I found no mention of the 1031 at all specifically, although there's one sentence I'm going to hit in a few minutes that causes me to pause a little bit that way. Next slide, please. On criminal justice, why am I talking about this with commercial realtors? Because the urban vibe is not dead, but it's seriously damaged. And first of all, it was COVID. All right. Nobody wants to take the subway. Nobody wants to take the bus or the train. And how do you get 1,000 employees up on the 20 and 21st floors when you can only do 3 or 4 at a time, or you got to get a reservation to use the elevator? And there's no coffee shops are not there. Restaurants are not there. The urban vibe is sick right now. And if I could have shorted the urban vibe, if there was a financial instrument to do such a thing, I would have shorted that huge in April. And that was just based on COVID. But now there's another issue, and it's called violence and crime, chaos and anarchy. And unfortunately, we're in the middle of a grand social experiment right now. We do this occasionally, and hopefully it works out well. Sometimes it doesn't. And this grand social experiment appears to be labeled progressive government. I'm going to educate myself on that. I honestly don't know exactly what that means. And when I first did my research, it was hard to even know what it means. I think it's kind of nebulous, but I'm determined to try to find out. But whatever it is, I know we have progressive mayors in cities that have a lot of urban violence. And so this criminal justice program of, quote, defunding the police just means replacing police with social workers and mental health professionals. And like the third bullet there, we're going to fund a civilian corps of unarmed first responders like social workers and mental health professionals who can handle nonviolent emergencies. How do you know when a nonviolent emergency becomes a violent one? How many times have you heard about that? So they're going to need to have more training in social work to train people to understand how to recognize when something's going to become violent. And so this is going to take a while to work. I hope it works, but I'm a little skeptical. And we're going to ensure that victims can seek justice through civil litigation. So if you don't like the way your police handled you, you can sue them probably sue the police department, and probably sue the mayor and the city as well. So my hypothesis is it may be harder to find social workers that want to work in this environment, and harder to find police that want to work in this environment too. And so here's a fact. Somebody asked me in a deal about a month ago, they said in Q&A, they said, "Are you seriously saying the urban vibe is dead?" And I said, "No, it's not dead. It's just sick. But I can tell you this, if these mayors allow violence to continue without getting it under control, businesses will leave there as fast as they can. Forget the corner grocery store, forget the coffee shops, and the workers that live there will move out too, because nobody in America wants to have a business in a war zone or live in a war zone." So here's the challenge to every mayor in this country. You call yourself whatever you want, progressive, whatever, non-label, but you better create an environment where people feel safe, or you will lose your urban vibe. And when you lose it, it can take a decade or longer to get it back. That's why I'm so bullish on the suburbs. Next slide, please. This is the last. I think I'm going to skip the other one, and these are going to be the last two, because the other one's education, and you can read that. But I do want to talk about taxes. They're talking about making investors pay the same taxes as workers. So that just means get rid of the capital gains tax, bringing into expensive tax loopholes. That when I saw that one, this is in about page 90 of that 110-page document, and I saw that and I kind of got goosebumps. Like, this sounds a lot like 1031 to me. And honestly, when I saw Donald Trump's tax returns being talked about, once some information came out, number one, I thought that's weird how it can be leaked out. I would feel bad if my private information was leaked out, but that's what happens in our country. But what I saw out of that was the benefit of owning a lot of real estate. I mean, that's why people invest in real estate, is for legal deductions for depreciation and interest. And so what I saw there makes total sense. This is what happens when your life is real estate investing. But the American people don't get that. It's like all they see is somebody that owns a bunch of real estate that's not paying any income tax. And I thought that was pretty damaging for the future of the 1031 exchange. I hope I'm wrong. And I can be. Like I said, 50% chance everything I say is wrong. So, and then the last one I want to mention to you is I have a lot of clients that are banks. And I talk to bankers all the time, and I understand their business pretty good, and they trust me, so I can joke with them. And a few months ago, I was joking with a couple of them and saying, you know, that dual mandate of the Federal Reserve, their dual mandate that they talk about every time they ever have a meeting or a public announcement, to keep inflation low and keep employment as close to full employment as they can get it. That dual mandate is created by Congress. And I was just teasing the banks, saying, what would happen if we get a trifecta and we get a new change in government where one party controls all three branches of government, and they decide to rewrite the Federal Reserve Act and maybe put somebody in charge of the Secretary of Treasury or of the chairman of the Federal Reserve that doesn't like banks? And they go, hey, that isn't even funny. Just don't even talk like that again. They were kind of joking to me, but it isn't funny, and it's scary. So as I'm getting closer to the end of the 110-page document, I went, oh my gosh, this isn't a joke. The bottom bullet there, the Federal Reserve Act should be amended. That's all I got to see. I can't guarantee anything, and I can't predict the stock market ever. But my opinion is that if they even talk about opening up the Federal Reserve Act for amendments, the stock market will astoundingly go lower, and interest rates will go up as well. Because once you open up anything for amendment, it's like, hey, while we're amending this, let's just review all the possible mandates that we could put on the Fed, And why don't we just say you have to print a lot of money every year and give it away? So this is something I can't fathom. I can't fathom we will have another lockdown, and I can't fathom that we will have an amendment to the Federal Reserve Act. But both are possible, and both will have significant negative economic impact on our country. Next slide, please. I'm going to let you read about education. This explains why young people are so big a fan of Bernie Sanders, because they're giving them a lot of free stuff. And that's what American politics is. You give people free stuff and they'll vote for you. Next slide, please. The economy is rebounding. I'm bullish about the economy. My outlook for the economy is good, not because of who's president, not because of the stock market being a record high, but because the American people want to get back to work, and they want to do things they want to do. The pent-up demand in this country has to be enormous. Think about it. Try to buy a boat or an RV or a bicycle or those. That's what pent-up demand looks like. Try to buy a house. That's what pent-up demand looks like. Well, that kind of pent-up demand energy is going to be unleashed all over in a bunch of ways I can't even discuss and imagine, other than, for example, just traveling and vacations and conventions and going to visit clients, all of those things. The pent-up demand is going to be enormous once we get there. But we're going to, in my mind, we're going to have to get through a long winter, because people, for whatever reason, it appears to me that people have kind of given up and just decided, you know what, I don't care anymore. I'm going to go visit my family, and we'll have a big family reunion. And then we've heard of friends of ours that did that, and then like 6 out of the 10 there had COVID about 5 days later. So it's obvious to me that we're going to have a significant slowdown in economic activity, even without a lockdown. It's just, it won't feel like your government's taking your freedom away by mandating that you do that. I feel pretty optimistic that by April or May and into June, we're going to feel a lot better, because we have turned the corner already. We turned the corner good. And if we could have somehow avoided having this massive recurrence of the virus, whether masks work or not, I don't know for sure, but they seem to work a little bit. But we're having this recurrence of the virus, and we'll pay the price. But with that said, I think by next summer, it's going to feel a lot better. And I'll show you why. My feelings are irrelevant. The facts are all that matters. Next slide, please. When people say, is this going to be a V-shape or L-shape or Nike swoosh recovery, my answer has always been, it's going to vary from city to city based on what the economic activity is in that city. There's going to be warehouse space built all over this country, because just-in-time manufacturing means you have very little inventory and a continuous supply chain feeding. Well, when the supply chain breaks down, suddenly you have empty shelves, and a lot of people are realizing that. And so huge demand. I could see shopping malls in cities being converted into warehouse space, and demand for warehouse space all over the country. I think there's going to be a lot of demand for development in the suburbs and also smaller towns within, I'll say, my estimate is within a 60-minute drive of the urban area, because I think a lot of people will be working at home, maybe not 100% of the time, but maybe 50% of the time. And I think a 60-minute drive is on the dance floor for people that say, I don't mind driving 60-minute commute one way, when I only do it 2 or 3 days a week instead of 5 or 6. So I think there's demand for housing, single family and multifamily, and the retail that goes with it. And I also think there's demand for office condos out in those smaller areas too, because you got two parents working on the internet all day long and managing the kids, and they'd like to, I can see demand where it's like, you go to the office condo this week, I'll take care of the kids and work. Next week, I go to the condo and you take care of the kids for the next week. But the flip side of that, and mortgage refinancing isn't going to get to 2.5. I think we're at the bottom of the interest rate cycle. The Fed engineered this so that mortgage rates can be refinanced at 2.9, and that's a tax-free pay raise for everybody that has a mortgage, and that's happening. They didn't have to take it down to 2.5. If we go into a second recession here out of this somehow, this virus, they can take mortgage rates way below 2%. They could take them down to 1% if they wanted to, and zero actually. And if you think I'm making this up, Google zero negative interest rates on mortgages in Denmark. It's already been done. But for cities that are big on conventions, they're going to be slow to come back. If you're in a city with a big airport, you're going to be slower to come back because nobody's flying, and those are huge employers. If you live in a state that has a heavy emphasis on oil and gas, you're going to be slower to come back. I had to apologize at a national convention the day before yesterday because I left Pennsylvania off, and I forgot about our cousins there in Pennsylvania that have a significant stake in the oil and gas business too. And then the last one I'll just put down here at the bottom, city and state government spending. Tax revenues are off, and so at the state level and the city levels too. So there's going to be a huge push to try to raise taxes, especially property taxes in my mind, going forward. Next slide, please. I just wanted to put this in here to illustrate to you what a huge government mistake is. This is initial claims for unemployment, and it goes back to 1960. And those gray bars that are coming down, vertical ones, those are recessions over the last 60 years. And under the worst conditions of all in 2009, initial claims for unemployment got up to about 700,000. See what a government mistake looks like when you lock down a government? I'm proud of the World Health Association to be smart enough to look at a slide like this and go, this was a mistake, a huge mistake. You see what's happened here? The initial claims, the news was out yesterday, 708,000 or whatever the number was. It was a 700 and something thousand. And they said trending lower. Well, it's trending lower, but it says at 700,000, it's as high as it's been in the last 60 years. And it would have been considered a disaster up until the government mistake we made. So make no mistake about it. We are in serious trouble in this country. And that's why interest rates are going to stay low for a long time. Next slide, please. The good news, there's good news and bad news. Consumer confidence has bottomed out. It appears to have. And as long as our confidence in our future remains strong, it will. And the only way our confidence in our future won't is if we lose confidence in our government's ability to do anything. So I'm praying that our government will do some good stuff. They make mistakes just like me. But on the whole, I'm praying that they'll do good stuff that helps us make it around, because the American people will get us out of a recession without government. Governments can only really create extra long recessions by continuously making mistakes. Next slide, please. Here are the facts. Small businesses, here's a survey. These aren't political surveys either. These are all business surveys. The human resource management people back in May said 52% of small businesses expect to be out of business in 6 months. Next slide, please. This is from the National Federation of Businesses. This was a late August survey. I know Bill Dunkelberg. He's the chief economist there. I've been on programs with him in the past. That guy knows what he's talking about. And they survey their membership once a month on a lot of things. And in August, they came out and said 1 in 5 businesses say they'll have to close their doors if economic conditions don't improve in 6 months. You know what 6 months from August is? Last I checked, that's slightly after the first of the year. So that's why I'm thinking more layoffs are coming, because Congress didn't do anything. Jay Powell, chairman of the Fed, Stephen Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, were begging Nancy Pelosi, please talk to President Trump and get something done. And that's what I don't admire about the Democratic and the Republican parties. Their tribal warfare is primary in their minds and have been for decades. And our tribe either wins or the country loses. We don't care if the country loses. We care that our tribe wins. And that's why I'm completely disgusted with Republicans and Democrats as a party. I love people, the American people, that are Democrat or Republican, but the parties I don't like at all. Next slide, please. Two more of these, just in case you're making them, think I'm making them up. These came out in a Bloomberg article in August. Yelp is measuring 80,000 businesses already permanently shuttered through July 25th. And a U.S. Chamber of Commerce survey of their membership says 58% of small business owners say they're worried about permanently closing. This is a disaster. And part of it can't be helped. I mean, even without government lockdowns, a lot of people aren't going to want to go out and buy stuff. And I get that. But at least we have the freedom to make that decision. But this is a serious situation. And that's why I think our government should have already printed another $2 trillion to try to kick the can down the road for another 3 or 4 months. The problem is if it lasts more than 3 or 4 months, they'll have to print another 2 or 3 trillion. Every 3 months that goes by, our government needs to print and give away about $2 or $3 trillion to avoid having massive layoffs and unemployment. Next slide, please. There are signs of recovery, and this is why I feel like we're already out of the recession. A recession technically means you have 2 quarters of negative GDP. We didn't even have that. We had 1 quarter where the GDP fell off a cliff, and then we had the next quarter, most recent one, where it exploded at an unprecedented rate. So we haven't had 2 quarters of negative GDP. But with that said, I think what we're going to see going forward is a slow, gradual recovery after we have this whipsaw effect. Next slide, please. Other signs of recovery is that freight volume's picking up. That's why there's so much demand for warehouse space, because people are buying stuff. We're not quite back up to where we were, but we're getting close. And China's already past that. The amount of freight and shipping activity going out of China is higher than it was a year ago at this same time. So people want to buy stuff. Lots of pent-up demand. Next slide, please. This one is the best of all. This came out in late September. I'm going to read it to you just because it makes me feel good to read it. Americans are starting new businesses at the fastest rate in more than a decade, seizing on pent-up demand and new opportunities after the pandemic shut down and reshaped the economy. This is what's so good about America. The entrepreneurial spirit in America is just amazing. The capitalistic system, where not like socialism, where a government can tell you where to work. No government can tell you where to work. Nobody can tell you where to work in this country so far, and the American people won't tolerate it. And so this is the beauty of the thing. This is why I'm bullish that as time goes on, we're going to recover. And I feel like that's already started. I'm going to show you more information, but it's going to get even stronger as the fear of the virus continues to fade. Next slide, please. So let's talk about real estate. I put this in here. This is my own comment. There's a global interest, I would say a global enthusiasm for real estate in the United States, largely because we have the rule of law and private property rights. And I think this is a temporary mistake governments are making, thinking they can take away your property rights just because there's a health crisis. But Americans won't stand for that. You think there's peaceful protests now? If you start taking away private property rights and the rule of law, there'll be big peaceful protests. That's one thing Americans are united on. We don't want our government running our life, no matter if they're Republican or Democrat. You can take that and chuck that at the door, because we're not going to tolerate a mayor telling us what to do for very long, or a governor, or a Congress, or a president. And that's why I'm bullish. Next slide. Occasionally, you'll see that commercial property values are down. Green Street is a cool organization. They have very smart people. and they publish this price index, and it comes out once a month. They do that for marketing purposes. And their commercial property price index dropped 12% in April or May, and now it's down 10%. But what you have to understand about Green Street is they're kind of guessing. They infer based on the stock price valuations of REITs that whatever happened to the stock prices has the underlying properties have gone down as much. So if apartment REITs as a whole are down 20%, they might infer for a while that apartments are down 20%. If retail REITs are down 57%, they might, or hotels are down 57%, they might infer that properties are down 57% in that category. What they're seeing is, I noticed just recently that prices in apartments and industrial are actually going up. The prices of hotels and retail are obviously damaged, but so I just want to help you with that. If you have clients that might be wanting to try to buy multifamily or industrial, and they cite to you that, well, everybody knows that real estate prices are down. Well, you might explain to them that in my mind, there's not enough price discovery to prove one way or the other what's happened, because there just hasn't been enough transaction volume to document a price trend for a lot of real estate asset classes. Next slide, please. I've already talked about the urban vibe. This is what the urban vibe looks like on TV, and that's why these mayors better take control, because this doesn't sell. No business wants to live in an environment like this, work in an environment like this, and the people don't want to live in it either. Next slide, please. Okay, you guys and gals know all about Regis and WeWork, so I'm going to skip this slide. It's funny how time goes by. There's a couple things I want to talk about. So let's go to the next slide, please. I'm going to allow you to read some of this. Just support for the idea that moving to the suburbs is not something I'm making up. It's happening as we speak. Next slide, please. You think there's too much money chasing deals now? Blackstone just raised $8 billion to buy debt. That's kind of what you do in this cycle in this stage of the real estate cycle. You may not buy equity, you might buy debt instead, knowing that if the equity gets washed away, the debt still owns the property. $8 billion coming in there. Next slide, please. 8 billion sounds like a lot, but private equity in America is sitting on a powder keg. They call it dry powder, 204 billion. 204 billion dry powder. What that means is these people have spent money and raised investment funds from investors and promised them they're going to buy real estate, and they've got that and they haven't invested it yet. And so what I call that is a distressed buyer. So we have distressed sellers, but we've got a lot of distressed buyers. So the price impact on this COVID thing isn't going to be as big as some people hope, because there's just too much money on the sidelines waiting to get in. Next slide, please. And then I think I want to close with this slide, and then we can go to some questions about interest rates and inflation. But here's more money coming in. Institutional investors, who are they? Pension funds, life insurance companies. And so those pension funds keep increasing the allocation to real estate. If you're a pension fund manager, 40 years ago, you were 50% stocks, 50% bonds. Well, back in the 1980s, they decided we need to own some real estate. So maybe 5% allocation. Maybe we'll try that. That was in the 80s. When I was in college at UT getting my PhD, I saw it happening firsthand. Well, since then, it's grown now to 10.5, and it's growing again. So these big institutions have raised their allocation another 0.5% to 10.5, and that's big money. So you see what's happening here? Institutions want more real estate. Private equity wants more real estate. Blackstone's raising money. International investment funds are raising money. And a lot of it wants to come into real estate. And so I want to leave you with this. Call it the Venturi effect. You know, when you focus water in your garden hose, If you focus it tight enough, it'll spray 40 feet instead of 6 feet out of your hose. That Venturi effect, I think, is going to happen in real estate over the next couple of years, because let's just say that there's $10 that wants to get invested into commercial real estate. Well, in the past, just to make it simple for fun, $2 goes into hotel, $2 goes into retail, $2 into industrial. You get the idea. Well, nobody really wants to invest in retail and hotel right now. So that same $10 is going to not go there anymore, at least for the short term. And it's going to go into the other remaining food groups. So I think industrial and apartments could easily see continued cap rate compression because of all of these distressed buyers that want to own more real estate.
Thank you so much to Dr. Dotzer for providing his insight and knowledge on today's economy. I hope you really enjoyed it and thought that it was just as informative as I thought. And thank you again to LandCare for sponsoring our luncheon. We really appreciate you. That wraps it up. Thank you to everyone who joined us for the last luncheon of 2020. The next one will be in January 19th. So thanks again and stay safe.